of you. I welcome you all to the webinar on Biodiversity and Human Wellbeing being organized by the Department of Economics, Jamia Millia Islamia, in collaboration with Biodiversity Collaborative, Banglore, on this auspicious occasion of World Environment Day. Jamia Millia Islamia is a century-old best higher education institution in the country. It was established in 1920 as a response to Mahatma Gandhi's call to boycott all British-funded educational institutions during the non-cooperation and Khilafat movement. It has a rich history, culture, and diversity. And it is a product of national freedom movement. And as far as the development of the university is concerned, it became a deemed university in 1962 and became a central university in 1988. At present, Jamia Millia Islamia is the 6th best university in the country in the ranking of Ministry of Education, Government of India. And Jamia was also re-accredited with A++ by NAC. And Jamia has also improved its ranking in the world ranking by different agencies. And as far as department is concerned, Department of Economics is one of the most dynamic department in Jamia. It was ranked as the best for economics and finance by Times Higher Education Ranking 2020 of UK. Webinars and public lectures has been an important and regular activity of the department. It is in this context that we are organizing a webinar on biodiversity and human well-being by our respected speaker, Dr. Ravi Chellam. It is my privilege and honor to welcome Dr. Ravi Chellam, who is CEO of Metastring Foundation and Biodiversity Collaborative, Banglore. He has a rich experience in biodiversity conservation, training, and education. It's our privilege, sir, to welcome you to the department and to this program. And you have been kind enough to accept our invitation on a short notice. And I am extremely thankful to you for this. And I hope we will be able to build an enduring relationship with your esteemed organizations. I also welcome all my colleagues and students to this important program. With these words, I wind up, and now let me request Dr. Srinivas, who is in charge of public lecture series, to briefly introduce Dr. Ravi Chellam to the audience.
Dr. Srinivas left the meeting a few minutes ago. He's not there.
So, London, can you introduce Dr. Ravi briefly?
Wasim, can you mute yourself?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, esteemed head of the Department of Economics. Dr. Ravi Chellam has a rich history of working in multiple organizations, including Wildlife Institute of India, WWF, Metastring Foundation, he is currently with. He served at Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment. Most recently, for the last 3 years, he has been associated with the Biodiversity Collaborative, which is a network of institutions or organizations working towards various matters connected with biodiversity. And most recently, he has been an author to the detailed project report, one of the authors to the detailed project report to the National Mission on Biodiversity and Human Wellbeing. This is one of the 9 missions of Prime Minister's Science, Technology, Innovation Advisory Council, which was approved in 2018. He has been a co-author along with myself in the roadmap towards the implementation. Today, in this occasion, he will be giving an introduction on this particular mission, the DPR or the detailed project report or the plan that was to be unveiled, and also the roadmap. With these words, I welcome Dr. Ravi Chellam to the Department of Economics, Jamia Millia Islamia. Over to you, Ravi. We would say you can, I would say 45 minutes, maybe 1 hour, you can speak, and then I would expect if there is questions, the questions can be put on the chat box, and which I will moderate then. Ravi, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Ashraf. Thank you, Professor Nandan. The way I'm, first of all, greetings on World Environment Day to everybody. That's the occasion that's brought us together. The way I am conceiving today's session is I would speak for anything between 40 to 50 minutes, but begin by really setting the context. I want to spend nearly half the time I speak in setting the context, because one needs to understand where and why and how the mission is important, where we are with the mission, what all of us as citizens of this country need to do to not only make the mission reality, but carry things forward from there. But it's equally important that we have a discussion, a dialogue, a question and answer session, because I think one-way communication has its great limitations, and it's not really about me trying to give gyan, but all of us trying to take some kind of a collaborative, collective journey. So having said that, hopefully technology will cooperate with us now. Here we go. So Control L.
Right, Ravi.
Okay, good. So the title of the mission is National Mission on Biodiversity and Human Wellbeing. I am institutionally affiliated with Metastring Foundation, which is one of the members of the Biodiversity Collaborative. Now we are meeting on this year's World Environment Day, the theme of which is only one Earth. 3 simple words, but words that carry a lot of significance, a lot of meaning. While the Bezos and Musks of the world might dream about setting up home on Mars or Moon or wherever, let's be very clear that for lesser mortals like us, there is really only one Earth. Not just for us, but for the plethora of species, most of which have preceded our presence on the Earth by a few thousand, if not a few million years. So not only do we need to look after ourselves, we have a moral obligation in that sense for all the species that preceded us and make life possible for us on this one and only Earth. So it's about time we resolved that we take care of this home, the Earth, the planet, if not for any other reason, purely from a selfish survival perspective. It also happens to be the 50th anniversary of the first UN Conference on Human Environment, which was held in Stockholm. And Mrs. Indira Gandhi, our then Prime Minister, was the only head of state really to attend this meeting, recognizing the importance of the subject. Of course, Olof Palme, the Swedish Prime Minister, was there as the host, but none of the other countries' heads of state took it seriously enough to attend. Today's World Environment Day celebrations, amongst other things, calls for collective and transformative action. Action that will happen at a global scale, which should include the celebration of nature, the celebration of biodiversity, the protection of it, which then will lead to the restoration of our planet. Our planet is wounded. Our planet is sick at this point of time. There is time, there is opportunity, if we can get our act together collectively to make a change, not wait for somebody else to take action, but for each of us to take action. But let's not forget that this is also a time for celebration. We are in the early days of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. There is clearly a global recognition that there are issues that we need to address seriously, which is why this current decade has been dedicated for restoration of natural ecosystems. I was born in 1961. Rachel Carson, a pretty well-known American environmental scientist and author, wrote this in 1962. 5 words: in nature, nothing exists alone. Something which has very, very deep meaning. Something, if we truly recognize that human beings are not just products of nature, but truly belong to nature, and that anything that we do to nature will come back in some way or the other to affect our well-being. Hence, we need to be dealing with nature in a very respectful, with reverence, and tread carefully. Nature is not something like toilet paper to use and throw. Nature is the very foundation of our existence. Everything is interconnected, including our lives. And let's not forget, even as each individual, we carry a lot of biodiversity on and out within us. The microflora and the microfauna that lives in our guts, that makes our life possible, is also part of nature. And please think about this. These are deep words, and these are words that have had a significant influence on my life, in my way of functioning, and in my thinking. As I said, it's time to celebrate. India is blessed with enormous diversity, and I've taken the liberty of putting together some hopefully inspiring pictures to take us through on a quick tour of what this diversity looks like. Largely focused on forests, and all the colors that you see are really different shades of leaves and not flowers. Rainforests to the northeast, rainforests to the western Ghats are some of the most species-rich forests that we have in this country. Extremely tall trees towering over the canopy, and often referred to as water towers of our country, where many of our major river systems originate, provide the elixir of life for the millions of citizens of India. These mountains, these forests are not all the same. Here is a unique complex of shola grassland system, what is also called as sky islands. So you see the dark green patches of forest which are found in the folds, the protected parts of the Western Ghats. The more exposed are only having grassland. Another picture to illustrate that. These are also called sky islands because the forests are islands in the largest system of grasslands. Variety of moist deciduous forests, dry deciduous forests, and even drier forests. But look down in the valley, the riverine forest is evergreen. A close-up of what our riverine forest looks like. Open forest and savanna thorn forest. Sometimes, or I should say very often in our public discourse, we talk of good forest, bad forest, and things like that, which is a very flawed understanding, which is a very wrong way to address natural ecosystems. All types of ecosystems, all types of habitats are good. These are products of nature. These are products of the interaction between the biological elements of an ecosystem, the geological elements of the ecosystem, and the climatic patterns, the weather patterns that operate on that. Poorer, lesser rainfall areas will look like this. Obviously, you cannot expect a rainforest growing in these kind of habitats which get 600 millimeters of rain or less. But that does not mean the native biodiversity that's found there is any less valuable than what you would find in taller forests or wetter forests. Expansive grasslands. India, large swaths of India, even today, are covered by a variety of grasslands. Grasslands up in the Himalayas, to some of the Shola grassland forests that I showed you, tall elephant grasslands in the Terai growing up to 10, 12 feet high. This is central India, drier parts, western India, Rajasthan, Gujarat have probably amongst the most endangered species that are found today in India. The Guardian crocodile, a very special form of crocodile, unfortunately now more or less largely restricted to India with some populations in Nepal, highly endangered, an animal that requires free-flowing rivers, which unfortunately is becoming rarer and rarer. This nature, this biodiversity does not exist in vacuum. Not in a country like India, where we have 1.2 billion people living, not just living, but interacting with nature on a daily basis. These are just some pictures to tell you what it is like for these people to live, both on land, in forest, in water. Well over 40% of India is still biomass dependent on native productivity of our lands. And anything that's going to undermine the sustainability of their livelihoods will really create social chaos. We often do not look at nature, biodiversity, and the richness as part of our heritage. India and Indians are blessed with such diversity, such richness, and that's really led to our civilization, evolution of language, evolution of culture, evolution of religions, evolution of livelihoods, evolution of ways of life. And so nature, people, that interaction is dynamic, is constantly evolving, is somewhat interdependent. People need nature more than nature needs people. But all of this is a rich heritage which needs to be cherished, understood, celebrated, sustained, and passed on to our next generations. We often think of passing on properties to the next generation, cultural artifacts to the next generation, but not enough thought, not enough action is there to really think about what is it that we are passing on in terms of natural heritage to the next generation. And I hope we will find some time to discuss these things later today. I've given you a bulk of the photographs I was going to show you today. I've already shown to give you a sense of the richness that we have, and to kind of zero in and try and collapse that into easier understanding. I've put together a few maps. This is the biogeographic zones of India. Very seldom does a country have such richness in terms of biogeographic zones. Biogeographic zones is a combination of the biology or the biodiversity and the geography. Geography in terms of physical features, geography in terms of latitude, longitude, and you see the diversity. And this is the broadest classification. Each of these zones have many subzones. No wonder India is one among 17 mega diverse countries in the world. We figure among the top 17 countries in the world in terms of the diversity, natural diversity that we have. I took you on a tour of different kinds of habitats. This is just a map of the forest types of India. Again, very seldom do countries have such variation. I mean, we are lucky that we go from the high snow-clad Himalayas to Kanyakumari, which is like close to the equator. So you're basically in equatorial zone. So very hot to the extremely cold, very wet to the extremely dry. And all of that is represented in this diversity of forest types. And again, these are the top ways of classifying forests. Each of these forest types have multiple subzones, subclassifications. Globally, there are 36 biodiversity hotspots, and India is home, at least partially, to 4 of them. The Himalayas, the Indo-Burma, the Sundaland, which is the Nicobar Islands is part of the Sundaland Global Biodiversity Hotspot, and of course the Western Ghats in Sri Lanka Biodiversity Hotspot. Again, no other country really has this level of richness. Not only in terms of wild diversity, India is also one of 8 centers of crop origin in the world. And you can see those marked on this map and look at, given the global distribution of land and where India is and how much area we occupy, the Indo-Burma region is really up there in terms of what we have contributed, the richness we still have, and the influence we've had on global populations in terms of access to food. Increasingly, even economists are beginning to engage with aspects of ecology, be it in terms of pricing, be it in terms of understanding the foundational elements of what biodiversity, nature, ecology provides for economic systems. This is a simplified view in terms of what we call as ecosystem services. Services that human populations derive from nature and ecosystems, natural ecosystems. I'm not going to get into all the details, but just to highlight the fact that almost every aspect of our life, be it fresh water, air, food, fodder, fuel, regulating climate, floods, the mind, the spiritual aspects of our life and good health is all linked to nature, functional ecosystems, and we don't understand fully even now how these things function. And the impact we are having on all of this is now a lived experience for us. We are seeing changes. Many of you probably live in North India. You've had the misfortune of enduring these prolonged heat waves, and come winter, you have to battle with extremely poor air quality, and none of that. And we sometimes tend to term these as natural disasters. Unfortunately, none of that is natural. It is anthropogenic or human caused. So you need to keep issues like nature forming the foundation of life, ecosystem services enabling life to be what it is, and earth being the really only place that we can call home in mind when we think of almost anything. And more importantly, filter all our decision making to be sure that we are making nature, ecosystem services better, or at least continue to remain stable, and not undermine, destroy in the name of development. Destroying nature, destroying natural ecosystems cannot and should not be dignified by being termed as development. This is not such a recent concept. It's been around at least for about 10, 15 years now. The concept of planetary boundaries. A lot of thinking has gone into it, and there are primarily 9 planetary boundaries that people have come about. And you can see the green, the first circle is the safe operating space for each of these planetary boundaries, some of which are still to be assessed and quantified. But of the ones that have been assessed, most indicate code red, or in other words, danger. Especially look at the biological aspects of it. We have far exceeded the planetary boundaries. The amount of novel chemicals and plastics we are throwing, again, we far exceed. We are disrupting global biogeochemical cycles both in terms of nitrogen and phosphorus. We are causing large-scale land use change, way beyond what it can sustain, and definitely climate change is increasing day by day. If at all, none of what I've said has really brought home the message, I'm hoping that this graphic will bring home the fact that it's time for action. Time for action at our individual level, time for action at a collective level. There are estimates today that suggest that our current consumption level is at 1.6 times the annual productivity of nature. And as economists, you will all understand what that means. If you're way beyond your budget, yes, you can survive overdrafts for a few years, but definitely not on a continual basis. Also, if the overdraft is undermining our ability to survive, to produce, then we're going to become more than a basket case. And we don't have to look far around than in our immediate neighborhood to use an economic example of the dire straits we would face, Sri Lanka being the point, the example that I wanted to bring to your attention. The other term I would like you to remember is extinction is forever. Whatever technologists might say, whatever science fiction might say, in reality, once a species goes extinct, it is very, very, very unlikely that you're going to be able to bring it back. Today, we are in the midst of what is called as a sixth mass extinction event. Extinction is a natural phenomenon. I mean, dinosaurs went extinct through natural means. It was not human caused. But it occurs at a rate which is roughly 1 to 5 species per year. Human caused extinction is functioning at 1,000 to 10,000 times that background rate. And we expect dozens of species going extinct every day. Not that we are recording it, because quite a significant part of our biodiversity is still to be discovered, still to be described by scientific means, and many of that are going extinct even before it's recognized by science. The current state of extinction is the worst species die-off since the loss of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. And that should tell us something. And scientists estimate that in the next decade or two, up to 1 million species are at risk of extinction. So what is the current status on World Environment Day 2022? The Earth is facing a planetary emergency. It's coming at multiple trajectories, at multiple ways. And these are not isolated things operating. They will act synergistically. Not only will they act synergistically, they will reach what is called as tipping point. And current trends seem to indicate if we don't reverse these things, if we don't get our act together, by 2030, we might well reach tipping points. Once we reach tipping points, it's very, very difficult to, it'll be a runaway disaster. It'll be very difficult to stop. It'll be very, very difficult to reverse those trends. That's what modeling seems to suggest. And what are these three major ways in which the planet is facing an emergency? Climate change is already something we've told. The whole globe is heating up far too quickly. And through that heating, all kinds of disruptions are happening to our global weather system. And people, as well as nature, just do not have the time or the means to adapt. To add to this, we are destroying habitats, and climate change in itself also results in some kind of habitat loss. And we've already talked about what it means in terms of species survival and extinction. In the name of development, we continue to pollute. We continue to pollute our air, land, water, and let's not forget also noise pollution, light pollution. We, in the name of safety for human beings, do a lot of night lighting. Night lighting is a death knell for all forms of nocturnal life, insects, birds, and many other. So these are the three broad areas through which the Earth is facing a planetary emergency. But there's clearly hope. There is a way forward. But that way forward needs to start now. We need to, as I said, change the paradigm of destroying nature for us to develop. We have to transform our economic thinking and functioning so that societies become inclusive, fair to all sections of society, and more connected with nature. It is not nature and us. We are part of nature, and for us to thrive, nature needs to thrive. Since so much damage has been done, largely over the last 300-400 years, but definitely in an accelerated manner after World War II, which is in the last 70 years, we have to not only stop destroying nature, we have to start restoring nature. And as I already told you, this decade is the decade for ecosystem restoration. Some numbers to back up what I've been saying. Look at the percentage of species that are all threatened across various taxa. And I mean, this is just to give you a sample of the level of danger that these species face. And why it's happening. It's really happening because of human action. We cannot be in denial. We are consuming too much. That consumption requires resources. And the way we access those resources is what the problem is. We have to cut down on consumption. We have to find ways of making our resource consumption much more sustainable. And we've not even talked about invasive species and pandemics, all of which also create all kinds of challenges for natural ecosystems. Species are going extinct, ecosystems are unraveling, and we don't know how most ecosystems function. And if we don't know how they function, how are we going to put it back? There is really a meltdown that's happening today. And one of the reasons is change of habitat, fragmentation of habitat, destruction of habitat. Again, graph to show you across taxa how habitat degradation and loss is impacting species survival. There is enough and more evidence of what climate change, global warming, and as I said, North India especially has experienced it in terms of heat waves, and we are setting record after record almost every year in terms of the heat that we are experiencing. And there is really no time to lose. It's a question of life and death. I mean, this kind of pollution, combination with climate change, as I will show you in a bit, is resulting in elevated mortalities. Data to tell you where the problem is in terms of India. PM 2.5 is a very, very deadly pollutant. And look at the high rate at which the exposure is taking place in the Indo-Gangetic belt. You can see the map around NCR, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar are really, really high. We are luckier in South India and Northeast. And it seems to be linked to the use of solid fuels, biomass basically, for cooking primarily and for heating. So there is a solution possible there. And ozone at ground level is also a pollutant. It can affect us quite tremendously. And then parts of North and Eastern India and Central India seem to be affected. And it's not just human health. There is a tremendous impact, economic impact, which will translate to human well-being in terms of income and livelihoods. And you can see, again, from this graph, what's happening. This is all database. This is all accessed from published papers to give you a link between environmental quality, human health, and economic loss. Here again, two maps to show you PM 2.5 on a global scale. And the darker the color, and you can see that in India where the darker color is the global thing, we are amongst the most affected across the world, apart from parts of West Africa. And the rate of change, the lower map shows you the rate of change between 2010 and 2016, so this is a rapidly developing problem, a much more recent problem, that India is facing. Well, look at this, an unwanted record. New Delhi is the most polluted capital across the world. India is amongst the most highly polluted countries across the world. It currently ranks number 5. These are not records we want. This is a graphic to kind of quickly explain how changes in environment, ecosystem functioning, all impact human well-being. And I hope I've made it clear that almost all the changes that we are seeing are anthropogenic or human caused, and almost all of this is being done in the name of development. If development is resulting in poorer air quality, in climate change, in degradation of land, in decline of fresh water, in loss of biodiversity, all of which will have negative impacts on human well-being, can that be even called development? Should it be called development? How can it be called development? Things to ponder about, questions to discuss, debate, and hopefully arrive at much more sensible, more inclusive, more sustainable ways for leading our lives. Elevated mortalities because of pollution. South and East Asia are amongst the regions in the world with highest levels of pollution and greatest level of elevation and mortality. And you can see how India, Nepal, and North Korea are having much greater elevated mortality rates. And this is not data to be trivialized. This is data over nearly 2 decades. This is good, solid information. We might say that our average lifespan is increasing, yes, but this is also data that we need to take into account when we plan for our development. And we are all still living through a pandemic. The pandemic did not come, as most people say, or some people say at least, from a leakage from a lab. The pandemic is a result of what we are doing to our world, to our biosphere. And this, mark my words, is not going to be the last of the pandemics. You might have already heard about a resurgence in Ebola in Africa, breakout of monkeypox. I'm not saying these are pandemics. These have the potential to be pandemics. And we had near misses with SARS, with avian influenza, not so long ago. And if we don't get our act together soon, we will unfortunately have to be dealing with such disruptors, costly in terms of human life, costly in terms of economics, costly in terms of our mental health, costly in terms of our overall well-being on a regular basis. Now, I've been talking about human action, environment, human well-being, but there are also linkages to the way we govern ourselves, the democratic freedom that we are able to experience, express. Here is an interesting graph which shows the correlation between environmental performance and freedom of press. Higher the ranking of freedom of press or freedom of speech, you find the environmental index of that country to be higher. India, unfortunately, is ranking somewhere there. The most recent index of press freedom for India ranked us at 150 out of 180 countries. Again, another map to show the kind of problems environmental defenders are facing. Of course, India is not top there, but it is a problem that we need to worry about. The size of the circle indicates the size of the problem. Again, with hunger index, we are not doing very well. We are 101 out of 116 countries. These are all real fundamental issues that we need to address. I would like to think that most of us in this call today have not really gone hungry to bed. I don't remember when I last went hungry to bed, but there are millions of our fellow citizens who are going hungry to bed on a daily basis. I don't want to be painting a doomsday scenario. There is time, there are solutions, there are ways of dealing with it. But as I've even right at the beginning said, it's time for action. We need to act. We need to act individually. We need to act collectively. We need to demand action. We need to move the needle. Sitting back, expecting things to happen is not a solution, it's not an option. And I would like to think one such effort is the National Mission on Biodiversity and Human Wellbeing. We have been working on this for the better part of 4 years now. We are hopeful, we remain optimistic that the government will formally sanction it sooner rather than later and launch it sometime this year. And this graph tells you what really the mission can do in terms of changing the trajectory for loss of biodiversity, for human well-being in India. If it's business as usual, it's a slope, it's a doomsday scenario. You will just get more and more into deeper trouble. And that 2030, as I said, is an important cutoff. That's the time we have, which is less than 8 years now. This mission has multiple programs, which I will shortly refer to. It has the potential to bend the curve in the right direction, bend the curve for the right reasons, bend the curve for all of us, not just as citizens of India, because ecosystem services, global biogeochemical cycling, climate change have no political national boundaries. These are global systems. Wherever good is done, wherever restoration is done, at least some benefits of that are going to flow into the global system. So obviously the most immediate beneficiaries would be citizens of India, but this has the potential to influence the global system. And it's also time to feel a little proud. No other country has even thought about such a comprehensive and ambitious mission. India is a global leader, is a trendsetter, but right now, much of this is still in the form of the detailed project report. That project report has to be actioned, and to be able to action it, we need formal approvals and formal resourcing in forms of budget, permissions, personnel, institutional collaboration, and so on. It's a mission for all of us. It's a national mission. It's not just a mission for few of us who thought of it. It's a mission for the citizens. It's a call to action for all of us. This is another way to represent that curve. Just stopping biodiversity loss is not going to be sufficient because the momentum of loss is so high. We have to intervene to reverse the loss, to restore, and then gradually build back. Of course, as I said, business as usual is not an option anymore. To give you a brief history, as Nandan in the introduction said, it's one of 9 national missions. We were lucky to be invited to present the concept note in the first meeting of the Prime Minister's Science, Technology, Innovation Advisory Council. That was way back in October of 2018. It was approved in 2019, and it was approved in November 2018. And about 7 months later, the Biodiversity Collaborative was given a preparatory phase project by the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to prepare the detailed project report. The Ministry of Environment is the nodal ministry which hosts the mission, and the National Biodiversity Authority is the nodal institution to implement the mission. As part of the process, we have held multiple national and thematic consultations. More than 900 people and more than 100 institutions have been consulted. Their inputs have been taken on board, and the detailed project report and the Expenditure Finance Committee memo have all been prepared and submitted to the government. The first submission was in December of 2019, and since then these documents have undergone at least 3 revisions and they are awaiting formal approval. The preparatory phase project was obviously affected by the pandemic. It got extended from 1 to 2 years. That ended in September last year. I'm currently the Biodiversity Collaborative, and the work we do linked to the preparatory phase project, trying to do some pilot projects on the ground, is supported by Rohini Nilakani Philanthropies. What does the mission aim to do? It really aims to bring right and center of national life, of public discourse in India, that biodiversity science is critical to anything and everything we do. Be it development, be it education, be it capacity building, anything that we really want to do will have linkages to biodiversity science. Because biodiversity science is going to deal with nature, ecosystem services, restoration, and the whole, the pandemics, One Health, all of that which is linked to human agriculture, livelihoods, bioeconomy, all of which is very, very critical for human well-being. We are in a world where climate is changing rapidly, impacting amongst other things our own health, agriculture, and derailing ecosystem services, which we can ill afford. This science will give us the knowledge, give us the tools to meet these challenges. None of this is going to be possible without institutional support. So the mission aims to strengthen institutions, build a strong cadre of researchers and teachers, strengthen civil society so that all of us are having the skills, the concepts, the tools so that we can speak to each other, to collaborate and bring about real change on the ground in terms of implementation, in terms of monitoring this implementation, which will reverse biodiversity loss, stop biodiversity loss, help us mitigate climate change and adapt to the changing world. Capacity building is a huge part of what we are trying to do. Capacity building, not just of experts, but of every citizen of this India, of this country, trying to bring biodiversity into their daily lives. They're part of their public imagination, their relationship with biodiversity. As much as we are proud of our cricket team and our film industry and our monuments and culture, we need to be proud and talking about biodiversity. Oh, did you see that flower today? Or did you see that bird yesterday? Or did you hear the bird? Did you hear the frog? These are things that we need to tune ourselves into. These are things that we really need to become capable of identifying, and these things are part of our identity. And that's the way we need to live our lives. And this new biodiversity science has to be a transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary science involving social sciences, psychology, and there's increasing evidence that human well-being has mental health as an important part, and nature has a very important role in our mental health. And I don't need to tell all of you that as much as physical health, mental health is also an equally important part of our lives. And finally, but not the last, to initiate a mass movement where people feel proud of our natural heritage and they're able to document and contribute to restoration and conserving life on Earth, generally, but definitely life as we know it in India. What are these programs that we have? The first and the central part of this mission is called Nisar Bharat, which has in turn 3 sub-projects. Much as we know about India's biodiversity being rich, there are still vast portions of our biodiversity, especially certain taxa like fungi, which are still waiting to be explored and discovered, and definitely much of our natural life genetic characterization is still to be done. The Biodiversity Act requires each panchayat in the form of its biodiversity management committee to have a people's biodiversity register. India is still lagging behind in that. This mission would kickstart this whole process, make it an electronic form so that storage, retrieval, use of this information is much more easy and streamlined. And there's a massive effort in bringing together all available data, cataloging the information that we have, mapping this information, making it publicly available through information technology tools, public portals, so that people can contribute, can benefit from, can engage with all the information that has already been collected and what that mission will continue to collect. The other 6 programs of the mission will interact with Nisar Bharat, will benefit from the work being done by Nisar Bharat, will contribute to the work that is being done by Nisar Bharat. And these 6 programs are biodiversity and ecosystem services, biodiversity, climate change and disaster risk mitigation, biodiversity in agriculture, biodiversity and health, biodiversity and bioeconomy, biodiversity capacity building and outreach. And I'll spend a couple of minutes on each. The concept of ecosystem services is still pretty novel in the country. While we identify the services, quantification is very rudimentary and mapping is still a long way to go. Some amount of land use change is inevitable. Some level of impact of climate change on ecosystems services is inevitable. But unless we have baselines, unless we have quantification, unless we have maps, none of this is going to be able to be tracked, monitored, and then to be able to be managed. This is primary focus of this program. Not just doing research, but working with people on the ground and doing large-scale experiments. Scale meaning 100 square kilometers or more, to restore various types of degraded ecosystems, to bring them back to life, to involve local communities in that, to empower local communities to be able to do that, and to actually make this a business model, make it economically paying, make it something that people feel invested in, because not only do you get benefits in terms of climate resilience, you would actually have economic flows coming through such kind of work. And then you can really talk about development. This is part of the development agenda, rather than nature being seen as an obstacle to our development agenda. As I've repeatedly said, disasters due to climate change are affecting us literally on a daily basis. Be it heat waves, be it unseasonal rain, be it extreme events, in terms of wind, in terms of unseasonal snow, flooding, and so on and so forth. And it's well established that nature has the answers to mitigate some of these risks, to help us adapt. Some famous examples include how well coral reefs, functional coral reefs, and mangroves can mitigate tidal action, especially when there is cyclone and so on. They control, mangroves even control wind speed during a cyclone and so on. But this is still not recognized enough. This is still not acted upon. The program on climate change and disaster risk mitigation will focus on producing the information, sharing the information, advocating nature-based solutions, producing maps, enabling us to predict and do pilots on the ground so that it is a safer world for us. I'm sorry, I missed saying something. The mission aims to help India not only meet but exceed some of the many of these Sustainable Development Goal targets. And you will see in each graphic for each program what are the targets that such programs will be linked to. The next program is Biodiversity in Agriculture. Agriculture, we should never forget, owes its origin to nature. All our crops are at some form modifications of what were once wild plant or animal species. Today, with more and more monocultures, with more and more high-yielding varieties, and more and more intensive farming, we are depleting our land, we are poisoning our land, we are depleting our water. Not only that, we are greatly depleting and even killing biodiversity that exists on our farms, biodiversity that's very essential for our farms. Take the simple case of pollination. Many of our fruit and vegetable crops need insect pollinators, but the high levels of insecticide use, the high level of destruction of natural vegetation and habitats in and around our farms is making it impossible for insect pollinators to survive. And can you imagine a situation where the entire suite of insect pollinators become extinct? then who's going to pollinate our crops? It's physically impossible for human-mediated pollination to happen. So from that selfish perspective, at least, we need to do a better job of retaining biodiversity on our farms. But also because plant diseases, plant productivity is an issue, because of reduced diversity of our gene pool for crops, enhancing crop gene pools and diversity is going to be a prophylactic, a kind of a measure that will help us ward off any further threats. Not only that, soil health is badly affected, and restoring soil biodiversity, restoring carbon in the soil is also going to be an important step towards enhancing and sustaining biodiversity in our fields. And climate change is acting on all our crops. You would have read about how the heat wave reduced wheat output. So we have to find ways to mitigate those impacts. And some of the things that this program tries to do is address these issues. The health program has two sub-programs, one which is called One Health, the other which is based on medicinal plants and traditional knowledge of medicinal systems that we have in India. One of the most efficient, less expensive, sustainable ways of ensuring good health for citizens of India is using locally available medicinal plants based on traditional knowledge. Unfortunately, modern allopathic medicine in many ways is seen as better. Obviously, medical technologies like X-ray imaging, MRI, and other tests that we do is definitely a step in the right direction, but synthetic medicines need not necessarily be the best answer to some of the challenges that public health is today facing in this country. So we are fortunate to have the transdisciplinary university as part of the Biodiversity Collaborative. They bring decades of work and knowledge on this subject to the national mission. So the idea is to make all of this information easily available to the public, local specific, taluk by taluk. What are the plants that are locally available? How can they be used for these conditions? So that kind of training, that kind of documentation, that kind of advocacy and sharing and capacity building is the main thrust. But also livelihoods based. How do you make some of this marketable products? How does local livelihoods get enhanced by conservation and sustainable use of medicinal plants? One Health is basically looking at health of the ecosystem, health of wild and domestic animals, health of human beings as interconnected. And as I already said, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought that message home. India is a hot spot for potential zoonotic diseases. Zoonotic diseases are diseases that jump from wild animals or domestic animals onto human beings, simply because of the extremely high density of our human population, the very high density of domestic animals, and the rate of change of land use. So the big thrust of the One Health program is to set up what are called as sentinel surveillance sites, about 50, 60 sites across India, which will be monitoring various parameters so that we'll have an early warning system if a disease is emerging, and we can then take the required action. This is the program that Professor Nandan Non leads, Biodiversity and Bioeconomy. And the thrust of this is to see how we can replace abiotic inputs, synthetic inputs to our industrial production systems by renewable biotic inputs. And in general, that also will have a great benefit in terms of carbon sequestration, better and more sustainable use of our natural resources. Change the entire economic way of looking at things. Include what you often use or call as external costs, costs related to environment, nature, local communities as part of the real cost, and then see how the numbers change. Make that part of the national accounting system, build institutional structures which are capable of this new way of functioning. And all of this hopefully will result in what we think can be a vibrant bioeconomy. And India, with its biodiversity, with its richness, with the traditional knowledge and prior experience, has the strong foundation for us to have both an economically viable as well as an ecologically sustainable bioeconomy going. The last program is biodiversity capacity building and outreach. It basically has 3 arms, one of which is about citizen science, engaging large sections of India's society to be able to observe, monitor, record information, and feed into programs that it's like crowdsourcing funding. This is crowdsourcing data, so that on the ground local groups can keep an eye on what's happening in their local environment, but then feed into much larger analysis, which can enable us to get regional and national scenarios. A lot of this is going to require capacity building, not just at the citizens level, but also at large national institutions like Wildlife Institute of India, Zoological Survey of India, Botanical Survey of India, and universities and colleges across the country. In corporate settings, increasingly companies have their CSR divisions, which have sustainability officers, and if they are brought on to the new way of functioning, what can be better than that? Much of the information on biodiversity and sustainability is not easily available, and we've already taken steps, and we'll continue to take steps through the national mission to make all of this information available, both digitally and in multiple languages. And right through all our programs, we have significant grants and fellowships available so that people with good ideas, institutions with good ideas and good activities on the ground can join the mission, can join hands, and so you have locally placed players joining the implementation of the mission. How do we envisage the implementation? It's an implementation in mission mode, which means it's time limited. We are thinking of minimum of 5 years, a maximum of 10 years, 2 phases of the national mission. It will be inclusive. It will include people and institutions from across. It's not just for namesake called a national mission. It will have to operate in all the states and all the union territories of India. It will be based on collaborations, partnerships, and consortium forming, which will involve government, civil society, academic institutions, local communities, and very significantly youth and citizens of India. This is not merely a program for the specialists and the privileged. As I've already said, there are these core programs, but each program has significant allocation of funds for grants. And once it's sanctioned, we will also make efforts to be raising additional money, especially for the grant component of the mission. It will be truly national, I've already said that, but there will be a special focus on the 120 odd aspirational districts. These are districts that used to be called most backward districts before. These are districts that are in many ways lagging behind in normal development parameters, but have plenty of scope in terms of the natural assets they have and how can we link their development trajectory to the sustainable use of their natural assets. As the Biodiversity Collaborative, we would be involved in some elements of implementation, but more from an oversight, evaluation, and monitoring of the implementation of the national mission, all of which would be done in collaboration with government agencies. We strongly believe not only is the national mission a much needed intervention, it also provides and opens up a whole slew of opportunities for thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Indians. It's a new science which believes in a new approach. And that approach is that it will be integrative and transformative, integrating across sections of society, sections of professions, and knowledge systems and subjects. It has to make a difference on the ground. It would be at some levels acting slowly because it's not easy to forge collaborations. Collaborations have to be nurtured, partnerships have to be nurtured for them to flourish. New tools that are still not very familiar and available to most Indians, which are digital, artificial intelligence based, and use of environmental DNA, DNA barcoding, are some examples of these new tools that we'll bring as part of the national mission. And this mission would involve strong, practical, on-the-ground implementation, as well as linkage to policy. So there will be a feedback mechanism back and forth, and will be responsive to the needs of Indian society. Communication, citizen science, and education are integrated into the planning of the mission, so they would kind of march step by step as the rest of the mission is being implemented. And these are not as often done an afterthought or a tail added to the core of the mission. And we hope through the implementation of the mission, through the capacity building that we've envisaged, we will be able to produce professionals and leaders for India to deal with what are novel and evolving 21st century issues. Our current training is not responsive enough, is not forward-looking enough. And that's what we hope that the national mission will be able to enable us. It has been challenging, and I would be lying if I say that the future does not look challenging, even more challenging. It will be challenging because it's a new approach. It is demanding interdisciplinary thinking and action. It is also integrating research and action. As academics, we are often happier just doing the research, and the practitioners are happier just doing the implementation. But this mission calls for collaboration across these artificial divisions at one level, for people to be working together, sharing knowledge, sharing experiences. It also is pushing for equal respect for various knowledge systems, not privileging one knowledge system over the other. Strong push for co-production of knowledge and joint action, government, civil society, local community, joining hands together for implementation. It strongly is pushing for decentralized functioning, democratization of institutions, as well as how we do science. Will try and push really hard for ensuring through all its phases of functioning and implementation that issues related to equity, justice, transparency, accountability, and power inequalities are addressed. This is a picture that's been haunting me for at least 5-6 years now. This is a picture of a magnificent male elephant, unfortunately crushed by its own weight when it tried to cross a man-made barrier. This man-made barrier costs few crores for every kilometer it is built, and we are building several tens of kilometers of such man-made barriers every year at least, if not more frequently. This is the state of our current wildlife management, which I think is very civil engineering oriented, which is somewhat removed from the nature of the resource, and even somewhat removed by how most of India interacts, coexists, and works with wildlife and nature. I don't want to end on a somber note. I think I've far exceeded my time, but please indulge me for another 5 minutes. I studied the lines for my PhD. I did my field work from 1985 to 1990. And this is the first photograph of a line. I was sent on a recce in December 1985 to figure out things. And 4 days I walked around Gir. I heard lions, I saw their tracks, I saw their droppings, I saw their killed remains, but I couldn't see a lion. And I had quit a marketing career to get into wildlife. And I was beginning to worry, is this the right decision? This was my last evening, and out of the bush came 4 lions about 100 meters away from me, and I was scared. I'd only seen one large cat before on foot, and here there were 4 lions, I thought, rushing towards me to attack me. There was a young boy, about 15 years old, who was the local guide, and I asked him, what should I do? And he just said, keep silent. So I held my breath, kept quiet. 3 of those lions disappeared, and by the time I realized I had pair of binoculars, cameras, everything hanging from my shoulders, as I said, 3 lions disappeared. But I took this one photo, and I'm very proud because this is my first photograph of a lion. It took me about 6 months to do this. That's me in the foreground and 3 lions in the background, about 10-15 meters away, on foot. This is not trying to paint myself as a hero, but this is just to give you a sense of what Indian nature has to offer. You expect a lion to come and pounce on you and kill you and things like that. These lions don't do anything like that. Most wildlife don't do anything like that. If you know what you're doing, if you know how to behave with these lions allow you special access. And the only reason I needed to do this was because I needed to identify these lions. And you look at the thick growth of vegetation, you might have the most powerful binoculars, but if you're 50 meters away from them, all you will see is a wall of grass. Here is our subadult lion sleeping. I took a photograph and look at his reaction. One of puzzlement, not of aggression. And my final picture, that's my own shadow. That's a wide-angle picture of a male lion sleeping, wild male lion sleeping. And I was within handshaking distance, taking this picture so that I could get my own shadow. I was a bit silly those days. I wouldn't do any of that now. But this is not about me trying to be brave. It's more about the lions and the special access they give. And the wonderful moments that I had to experience during the 4.5 years of field work that I did. This is what Indian wildlife is about. This is what Indian nature is about. This is what Indian biodiversity is about. I was brought up in Madras or Chennai. I'm a city boy. I grew up playing cricket. But millions of Indians, including hundreds and thousands of local people in and around Gir, are interacting with lions and leopards on a daily basis. They don't have such photographs to tell, at least in those days. Nowadays, you have mobile phones and all kinds of photographs come through. But this is the magic I want all of you to be aware of and experience. And please don't forget, there are wonderful sunrises and sunsets that India still has to offer. And this is one sunset in Gir, which I took a photograph of. And incidentally, this gave us the inspiration to name our daughter Roshni. Thank you very much. Sorry, Nandan, that I've taken much longer. But I also want to acknowledge all these people who helped me in so many ways in my professional journey, and more specifically for today's presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Ravi, for a brilliant and informative lecture. You have touched upon the whole gamut of environmental issues in a simple, simplified language, and we have learned a lot of lessons from your lecture. We look forward to have many more lectures in the department by you. Now I hand over the floor to Professor Nandan for taking up the questions and moderation and concluding remarks. After that, Richa Singh will be proposing the vote of thanks.
Thank you. Ravi, thanks for the brilliant lecture, touching from the institution to the political to the personal. I have categorized the questions that reached us through the chat box through two different ways. The first one, I'll put it at a more of a theoretical plane. So these two questions are, A, is that is up to what extent do the humans need economic growth while destroying the ecosystem? So that is part one, and the part two is that is to do with how can development take place without destroying nature?
It depends on how we define development or what is development. As I said, you all are residents of Delhi and North India. Unfortunately, North India is facing the brutal effects of heat wave and poor air quality. And if India has on an average 5 million deaths due to extra deaths due to air pollution, how can that be justified in the name of, because we think air conditioners, big buildings, fast cars, broad highways are development. I grew up in a world, I'm now 60s and 70s, there used to be a third class in train. We used to travel third class. We used to carry a matka, and every other station we could hop off, collect water from the station and drink that water. I first saw a plastic bottle of water when I watched Wimbledon on television. And then later we saw plastic, and today everybody thinks water comes from plastic bottles. So this is the notion of development. I find it a little surprising that I'm asked this question, how can we develop without destroying nature? If clean air, clean water is not available, if pandemics cannot be prevented, if the incidence of pandemics is going to become the norm for the day, is this the world that we want to live in? And if you look at, I've given you some parameters in terms of global hunger index. If our development path for 75 years allows us to be ranked 101 and not 101 out of 116 countries as in the global hunger index. What kind of development model are we following?
Thanks, Ravi. Let me move to the second part. And second question is that question number one is that yes, because you said that 10 years to reach the tipping point, or even 15 years to reach the tipping point, why it is not mainstreamed enough? And similarly, similar question, or in the similar vein, another question is that is there any potential to learn from forest dwellers and tribals who are living closer to land, water, and forest?
There's definitely plenty to be learned from what we call ecosystem people. But this learning will only happen if we unlearn many things to begin with. Because we view them as primitive, view them as, to some extent, uncivilized, and we view our knowledge systems as being superior. I'm not saying everything they do is right, but there's just plenty to be learned. There is increasing evidence, and this is not new, at least 10-15 years, there is evidence that lands and waters protected by indigenous people are actually far more effective in conserving biodiversity than official protected areas. So the evidence is out there. So that is the second part of the question. What is the first part? Sorry.
First question is that if the situation is that...
mainstream.
Yeah.
I have to put my hand up. I think many of us are to blame. We have been poor communicators. We have been in echo chambers. We've been talking largely to the converted. We've not made enough of an effort. But that would be just beating myself up. It is because of vested interest. Because there's a complete mismatch in timelines. Companies have to report every quarter. Elections are held every 4, 5, 6 years. Nature doesn't work in those time scales. Evolution definitely does not work on those time scales. If you want profit every quarter, that's unrealistic. I mean, from a purely economic model, it might work. But from an ecosystem sustainability model, it is not going to work. So Gandhi said, right, I mean, the world has, or the nature has everything to meet your needs, but not your greed. And we are projecting all kinds of disaster growth numbers. We have to grow at 8%, 10%, and so on and so forth. The pandemic should have taught us something. The richest people in the world have grown richer during the pandemic, when the poorer people of the world have lost their lives and grown poorer. So there's something completely wrong, broken with our system. Media is controlled, government is in bed with the rich people. So there is a struggle that's going on. Vested interests are too strong to be shifted, which is why each of us have to come to the table, not expect somebody else to change, convince ourselves, believe it's our mission for our own selves, if not for somebody else, for our children, for our grandchildren. What is it that we are bequeathing to our next generation is a question we need to ask ourselves.
Thanks, Ravi. A last set of questions is connected to financing. So the first part is to do with that, do you see any role for the nature-based solutions in resolving the climate crisis? In short, why there are not enough investment in the nature-based solution? Part two of the question is that it's a query on the finance pattern of the mission itself in terms of whether private investments or NGOs can contribute or expected to contribute or are coming to contribute. And that's it. These are the last questions.
The second question is shorter to answer. At this point of time, the mission is still awaiting approval. So to that extent, all we can say is there is a strong non-government participation both in the development of the mission, nurturing of the mission, trying to push for its approval and implementation. We are working with the highest levels of government. We expect to remain involved, and whatever we hear from the highest levels of government is nothing to change the implementation model that's been outlined in the detailed project report. As of now, financing for the budget in the DPR is seen as primarily coming from government sources, but nothing prevents us from supplementing that budget by privately resourced or privately raised funding, as well as adding dozens, if not more, of non-government partners in the implementation of the mission. Going to the first question on nature-based solutions, is it practical? Why is it not being done enough? Again, India is lagging behind. There are a few countries which are definitely slightly ahead, if not well ahead of us. With nature-based solutions, it is not like building a wall or a fence or a building. It is going to take time. It's going to involve people on the ground. It is going to involve some successes, some failures. And making those investments requires a completely different mindset, in that you need to recognize the value and sustainability. Upfront, the cost might be higher. Upfront, the pace might be slower, but the payoffs and the sustainability parameters are in the long term going to be much better. And it's not a single output model. When you use nature-based solutions, you're going to have normally climate change involved, local communities, livelihoods involved, biodiversity enhancement involved, clean air, clean water involved. So it'll be multiple outcomes when there is nature-based solution interventions. And unlike a wall or a building where you have specs, where you have estimated cost of raw material, so many kilograms of whatever tons of steel and so on, with nature-based solutions, again, you have to adapt, more or less relearn everything for each location. Even if it's on the coast, on the west coast, you need a different model compared to the east coast. For Gujarat, it's going to be a different model compared to Kerala, because nature works differently, because the local climate and ecosystems are different, and local communities' interaction with all these systems are different. So that's really the challenge. And I think instead of saying it's too complicated, it's too difficult, we need to change it and say, that's the magic, that's the opportunity. We can really evolve sustainable solutions where local communities will take ownership for this and try and go that path.
Thanks, Ravi. Thank you for this illuminating, inspiring talk and fully grounded on reality. I think it was very important to communicate that on this Environment Day, that yes, there is a possibility of making changes, but the path is not going to be easy, and you will need collaborations and cooperations of many, many people together. And this is something which I am saying not just as Ravi's colleague at the Biodiversity Collaborative, but also at Department of Economics, Jamia Millia Islamia, that yes, this is the university which has sustainable development of the society as its mission, as its vision, written within the vision itself. So this university looks forward towards such sustainable development of the society, in which ecosystems, biodiversity or sustaining biodiversity, these matters are important things that Ravi has clearly showed us, that without taking care of the biodiversity, sustainable development of the society is not possible. And I, being a part of the economics department, it must have economics fundamentals. I think, Ravi, I have benefited a lot from this lecture of yours. It covered a lot of ground. I think I'm speaking on behalf of not just me, for speaking on behalf of so many people who has come to listen to you on a Sunday after Sunday morning. That and I'm quite happy. Thank you everyone for being so patient and listening to Ravi. I just want to add one thing, that what Ravi said, some of the parts of it could be found out from this particular paper, which I have just added, at least on the mission part of it, not the first part of it, but I have added links to 2 papers in the chat box. These papers I have co-authored with Ravi. This captures the National Biodiversity Mission, or National Mission on the Biodiversity Human Wellbeing. Please feel free to read those if you are interested to go through different components of the mission itself. I think I'll stop here, and I will hand over the mic to Professor Ashraf Ilian, or should I request?
Yeah, now to
Yeah.
Richa Singh, final year BA Honors Economics, for a formal vote of thanks.
So first of all, a very good afternoon to everyone present over here. I, Richa Singh, on behalf of the Department of Economics, Jamia Millia Islamia, and the entire fraternity of the university, first of all, extend my most sincere thanks to the Almighty God for making today's webinar a resounding success. With His blessings and grace, we are able to make this event what it was. I extend a really hearty vote of thanks to our speaker of the session, Dr. Ravi Chellam, sir, who spared time from his busiest schedule to grace the webinar. Today we had an opportunity to hear your thoughts, and this will surely be going to encourage us in protecting the environment at large. I'm immensely thankful to our head of department, Dr. Ashraf Ilian, sir, for organizing such an insightful webinar on the occasion of World Environment Day. I would also like to thank the people who work behind the scenes to make this event a grand success. That is our technical support team. Thank you everyone who made this webinar a grand success. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ravi sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Hope to come and meet all of you sometime soon. And
Sure,
Okay,
sure.
sir.
Thank you, sir. You are most welcome, sir. You are most welcome.
Welcome, welcome. Most welcome, sir. Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Thanks, Ravi.
Bye.